Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Fistful of Dice. My name is Matt, and in this video, we're going to be taking a close look at Shadows Over Driftchapel, which is the second adventure kit that Absolute Tabletop has released. If you're unfamiliar with adventure kits, they're essentially, well, you can see there at the bottom on the tagline, they're modular toolkits to build endless RPG adventures. So the way we like to think of adventure kits is it's sort of halfway between a linear adventure module that you would get from, official publishers and your own simple prep notes. What is contained herein is fully modular locations, encounters, NPCs, monsters, and more that all fit together in any combination. So rather than having an adventure that you follow, an adventure kit gives you the tools to build your own adventure really quickly and easily. So we're going to be going through this kind of page by page, looking at the different sections, looking at how it differs from our previous adventure kit, Oath of the Frozen King, and just kind of talking about it. So there's people in the chat. Please feel free to ask questions, and I will be happy to answer them. So I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. So if you haven't yet picked this up, there are links down in the description to pick up both the PDF as well as the print copy, which is currently in pre-order. If you pre-order a print copy, you get the PDF right away for free. So that's a good deal. This was a book that we kickstarted in September. It was successfully funded, and we just delivered on New Year's Eve to our Kickstarter backers and those who pre-ordered on our website. So, all right, so let's go ahead and get started here. First off, here's the cover, which is I'm just in love with. Most of the art in this book was done by Alexander Kostic, who is someone that we have really, really enjoyed working with over the course of this project. And just did a stellar job on the art in this book. It's so evocative, so thematic. I'm just in love with all of it. And this cover is just the tip of the iceberg here, having the sort of the unsettling, almost H.R. Geiger-esque sort of the tentacles and the eyes, and then having the town of Driftchapel reflected in the central eye here is just a really sort of like a sort of unsettling, very jarring image, which just sets up the tone of the book, I think. As you'll see, this book is very Lovecraftian horror, but it's kind of got a pulp edge to it. So if you're into Call of Cthulhu, you should very much enjoy this book. So, all right, so let's get into it here. Here's the cover. And then this little splash page here is half of our landscape battle scene, which was one of the stretch goals of the Kickstarter. We're going to see the rest of this later on in the book. This is mostly just we need a blank page right after the cover for the print copy, and obviously we don't want it to just be a blank page in the PDF. So we usually put a little piece of art there, or something cool for people to look at when they're in the PDF here. So here's the front matter, just all the legalese, copyright information, and also the credits. You can see that we're all involved in it. Absolute Tabletop. I was project lead, which meant that I was sort of overseeing the production of the book and did a bulk of the writing and sort of outlining of the book. But obviously, with all of our books, we all work on them in some capacity. So, and then I also did all of the layout in the book. Tim Carney here, you see he's got a credit for art direction. That's because Tim worked super duper closely with all of the artists, Alexander, John Pintar, Nate, in really honing the look and feel of not only this adventure kit, but the world of Gloam, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But he did a really amazing job, and I'm, as always, just endlessly grateful for Tim Carney's presence. And as you can see, Alexander Kostic did the cover and the interior art, and we had John Pintar involved with both page design and some of the maps that you find in here. The dice drop map done by our good friend Nate Vanderzee over at WASD 20 through his Sellsword Maps map making service. You will see this is 5e compatible. We're going to get into that a little bit later on, but the book, the mechanics, everything is it's geared toward 5th edition, but in a way that makes it very easy to use with other systems. And in fact, in the Absolute Tabletop official group on Facebook, which there's a link down in the description, there are several people running games of Shadows Over Driftchapel, and one of whom is Chris Wilhelm of Drop Dice, is running it using Fantasy Flight Games' Legend of the Five Rings, which will be really amazing. I think there's a few slots in that game left if you want to go check it out. Lloyd Collins is running it in his world of Iskloft, which is really awesome. So, hey, everyone in the chat. Good to see everybody. So let's move on from this. So here's a forward. This is, we kind of started this tradition accidentally, but I think in all adventure kits, we'll probably see something like this. A version of the author featured in the forward. In Oath of the Frozen King, you might remember that in the forward, there's a piece of art of a troll, and the troll's name is Timbo, Timbo the Troll. And that, obviously that's a play on Tim Carney, who was the project lead on Oath of the Frozen King. So with me being the project lead on Shadows Over Driftchapel, we have Matthias the Mad here, who was based on me and my likeness. So if I was a crazy half-mutated fisherman living in a like colonial town that was beset by like Lovecraftian horrors, this is what I would look like, just for reference. But yeah, you know, here in the forward, I talk a little bit about the inspiration of the book and where it comes from and that sort of thing. So table of contents is all linked. The entire table of contents is linked. So when you click on things, it takes you to the page. And obviously the book is all bookmarked and outlined. So if you have the PDF open, you can have bookmarks and it'll take you exactly where you want to go. This is something that wasn't standard in our old books, but has since become, I get pissed if I get a RPG PDF and it doesn't have bookmarks or a linked TOC. I feel like those are both sort of essential. And you can see that, you know, we have the usual sections here that you would find in our previous adventure kit. You have the adventure overview, locations, encounters, NPCs, monsters, and then the toolbox as well. But there's also this thing at the end called the Gloam Gazetteer, which I don't even know if I'm saying that right. Like I hear people say Gazetteer, I hear people say Gazetteer. But that's basically a world atlas of the world of Gloam. So we'll get to that. This was a big stretch goal. This was the final stretch goal, the Gloam Gazetteer, and it was one of the things that I was most excited to be able to write for the book. And it kind of turns this book into a little mini campaign setting book, because there's, you know, obviously there's the Driftchapel adventure is the main bulk of it, but there's a lot of information about the world of Gloam and tools to run all kinds of adventures in that world. So, yeah, I think that adds a lot of like usability and like replayability to the book. It's just a lot of worth to it. So I'm kind of excited about that. So the first section is all about how to use the book. So if you've never used an adventure kit before, this is where you start. It kind of gives you an overview of how it works, and it actually gives you some methods for creating your own adventure. There's a new method here, Quick Start Adventure, which we got some feedback on Oath of the Frozen King that there wasn't a way to just open the book and run it immediately. And so this was important to us, having a, you know, hey, pair this location with this encounter, and that's how you can just run it right out of the book without any sort of additional effort. So we have the Quick Start Adventure method, which is new. This is beautiful. We ended up having a couple of blank pages, just the way that layout fell, because you want to have a chapter start on a left-facing page, and so we ended up just the way the content sort of divvied out with a couple of blank pages. And Alexander Kostic did a couple of beautiful full-page, sort of like journal entry pieces of art. And I adore this. There's another one later on, but this is just, I love it. It's kind of got that, you know, the Da Vinci sort of look to it, but obviously very eldritch and arcane looking. And yeah, so Alexander just did an amazing job. He's a joy to work with, mostly because he's just so passionate about it. Like he just gets so excited about the projects he's working on, especially if they have like weird horror-esque stuff. So, then we have the Build Your Own Adventure, which was a method in Oath of the Frozen King. We've refined it a little bit in here. And the Dice Drop Adventure Generator, which is a really fun way. This is a Tim Carney innovation. You grab a fistful of dice, one of each polyhedral, drop them on a piece of paper, and use these tables to build your adventure. Each dice corresponds to a different location, and each number on the die corresponds to a different encounter in the book. So here's a little illustration showing how that works. This was done by Nate Vanderzee of WASD 20 and Sellsword Maps. So he did a really good job with these little buildings. Are just so cute. I love them. It's so like just charming little illustration here. So, and then we get into the setting a little bit, and this is kind of an overview of the world of Gloam and Gloam is kind of it was kind of a joint project between myself and Tim Carney, and it was an interesting thing because it was we were both working on new settings, sort of autonomously. We were working on them separately. The one that I was working on was this idea of this like human empire that had sort of fractured and was like it was sort of dwindling, but it had used technology to sort of rid the world of magic and elves and dwarves and orcs and things like that. And I think initially I'd called it like Flintlock Dominion or Shattered Dominion or something like that. And it was kind of there wasn't a whole lot of like uniqueness to it, but I was feeling kind of a gritty, low magic kind of setting with flintlocks and dirigibles and like construct power armor and stuff. And I was kind of developing this setting, and Tim Carney was working on a setting that was a little bit like Twilight Zone, like Lovecraftian horror, weird, like seeping darkness kind of stuff. And we ended up sort of combining these two ideas and creating a world that we called Gloam. And it's like one of the best things we've ever done, because those two settings that otherwise would have been a little bit like, just kind of like, oh yeah, okay, that's a neat idea. Like I'd run a one shot in there. Putting them together, I think made it a really kind of distinct world. And there's nothing about it that is necessarily like completely unique, but I think it's a unique blending of like design and aesthetic and tone that I'm really happy with, and that people seem pleased with and like excited to run games in. So yeah, I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I'm really glad that we like published it. So one of the things that we included in here, and this was a stretch goal as well, was new mechanics for flintlock weapons. There are rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons of flintlock weapons and rifles and pistols and things like that. But they're not like, I don't know, they're not gritty enough. And so I wanted to have a rule set that worked, that wasn't like overwhelmingly finicky. And I find that like sometimes when you look up like flintlock rules for D&D, it's like, okay, like it makes you not want to use flintlocks. And so I wanted to, it's like a hard line to tread where you want the rules to accurately kind of represent like the fiddliness of flintlock weapons and like their sort of their lack of like reliability, but also have them be like enticing weapons, like weapons that people would want to use. And so I'm not going to go super in depth, but basically the flintlock weapons, how we have them working, the damage is kind of what you'd expect. It's scaled back a little bit from what you'd find like in the DMG, just to make them a little bit less overwhelmingly deadly. But they do bypass armor. If an enemy is wearing armor and you shoot them with a flintlock, their armor class is effectively lower when you shoot them. Just, due to the armor piercing qualities of a lead ball being propelled with explosive powder. There's also some rules for, if the powder gets wet, if your gun jams and things like that. So I'm really happy with how the flintlock rules turned out. I feel like it's like a good blend of like realism, but also like they still feel fantastical and they don't feel limiting to use, I guess. So yeah, so there's a few different flintlock weapons, as well as a variety of shot that you can use, some of which are real and some of which I made up. So there's illustrations here of there's rifle, blunderbuss, pepperbox, and pistol, and then some more kind of in-depth info on like what they look like, how they work, who uses them, and then some like historical guidelines for like what loading a flintlock looks like. This is kind of something that I feel like is not really talked about in like flintlock fantasy a lot, is like, what does loading a flintlock look like? Like, how do I describe this when I'm narrating my turn? And I found this really helpful to look up when I was running games in Gloam, when we were just kind of testing out the setting. And so I wanted to include something like that. And I actually tried to sync up with like a historical expert on flintlocks. And the few people that I talked to were not keen on talking to a game designer because they didn't want their knowledge or their expertise to be misrepresented in like a fantasy setting. And I totally understand that, but I was a little bit like, like it would have been nice to like run this stuff by like a historical expert. But it is fantastical, and it's kind of as close as I wanted to get to like gritty realism. So anyway, so that's the Flintlocks. And then here we have the setting primer, which is like just a one-page, like it's 10 points about the like important sort of pillars of the world of Gloam. Here's the map, which was a joint effort by John Pintar and Alexander Kostic. This is, I love it so much. I just love this map, and the look of it, the feel of it. I love that it feels like the darkness is just closing in on this world, and I love that everything just feels like this is the last stand. Like this is it. This is the final days of the world of humanity, and yeah, I love it. So we go more in depth into the different. There's 5 dominions, and then the crown lands here in the center. But we talk about the various dominions of the world of Gloam. Each one is ruled by a different regent. And then the city of Oubliette here in the center, which is built atop mountains for protection. And then there's other areas like the Gaslands and the Black Fields and things like that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the Gazetteer at the end of the book. Then you get into the adventure overview. This just kind of gives you like a high level sort of like, here's the locations, here's the encounters, here's the NPCs, like for quick reference to be able to kind of look and see what the deal is with all the different things. It also goes into the background of the adventure and the various like conflicts that you can utilize as game master. We get our first sort of story building role tables here. The first one is a quest, which will give you kind of like, what's the deal? Like why, who gave them the quest to go to Driftchapel, and like what's the sort of like the goal, what's the mission when they go into Driftchapel. This adds a lot of replayability to the book, I think, and gives GMs who are running it like multiple times some like a lot of like, you could run it for the same group and it would be different every time. The twist too kind of completely changes the landscape of the adventure. So if you wanted to use a twist, you could. It does things like the cult are not actually bad guys and things like that. Like it completely changes the base sort of like generic foundation of the book. So it's a good way to like shake things up a little bit. And then adventure motivation is like a really good way to just like get people involved from a personal standpoint of like, you know, are you here repaying a debt? Do you know somebody in Driftchapel who's in trouble? Like, were you robbed? You know, that sort of thing. Like it just sets up the adventure and makes it so that your party has a reason for being there and for wanting to get involved. Here's another joint sort of effort by John Pintar and Alexander Kostic. This is the map of the town of Driftchapel. When I was first sort of sending them the description of the town, I told John that I wanted Driftchapel to look like a claw reaching out into the sea. And he did such an amazing job, all the way down to the docks looking like claws coming out of the fingers of this town. I just feel like it's just creepy enough, like where you're looking at it and it's kind of an unsettling looking place. So I really like it. I love the light coming out of the profane chapel here. I love the lighthouse. It's just a really cool looking map. And again, sort of these black inky tendrils coming out of the sea, encroaching on this town. Like Gloam is a setting that is very claustrophobic as the darkness is sort of closing in around you. So that's the map of Driftchapel. And then we get into the meat and the potatoes of an adventure kit. These are the modular elements of the book. These are the things that you can combine, modify, use however you want. And the first little bit of modularity here comes in the form of locations. And so each location has a kind of flavor text that you can use to read aloud, as well as bulleted sights, sounds, and sensations that you can pull from to kind of like fill in the gaps as the adventurers are walking through the location. Like, what things do they notice? What do they hear? What sort of sensations are they experiencing as they walk through? And this was actually, so the streets of Driftchapel, this is the first thing I wrote for this book, and it was over a year ago. I was sitting at the kitchen counter at my parents' house. I was house sitting for them, and I wrote this location because I wanted a way to run an adventure kit that was not a dungeon, that was like an urban environment that had a location that you could go to again and again, being the streets. If you're not in a building, if you're not in the cave, if you're not in a location, you're in the streets. And I was really happy with how that turned out and how easy it was to make work. And we have we had a little bit of further usability by having a street generator down here, where if you go to the streets multiple times and you can have different looking locations within the streets themselves. So like if you roll, a 4 and a 9 or a 4 and a 6, you'd get, dilapidated row houses and a long intersection with a landmark. So that just adds a little bit of like variety to the streets. So you're not always just like, okay, you're on the street. Like you could be in an alleyway, you could be in a market or whatever. So yeah. And then we have the taxidermy shop with this wonderful art here. Taxidermy fast and cheap. Rivermouth Inn, which is kind of like the tavern location, and then Profane Chapel, which is a good kind of like adventuring location. In these little boxes here, these little breakout boxes, there's a lot of lore about the world of Gloam that we kind of sprinkled throughout. We wanted the lore to be featured, but not in the way. And I really feel like we did a good job of that, where you can just learn a little bit about the world by just reading these little boxes here. So the Ortis Lab, which is like an alchemy shop. The Ortis are the sanctioned mages of the world. They're the only ones that are legally allowed to practice arcane magic. So that's, you can go there, and we have this random alchemical reactions. This is a table that was written by Michael Barker. He did an amazing job with it. You can roll a D8 3 times and you get an ingredient, a second ingredient, and then the reaction that happens when you combine them. I just really like that. I love little things like this. So, and that's just so Barker. Like that's just a little piece of Barker here at the bottom of the page. So, and then the Dripping Caves, which is it's like a subterranean area that exists, under the city. And there's a little breakout box here about like, how do you find the caves? Where could they be located? Sort of thing. So, here's the other second full page art that Alexander Kostic did. This one features this is supposed to be like an Ortis that is like dissected, like an eldritch monster, and like, cutaway of like what the tentacles look like, and like things that you can make with pieces of the monster. Like I love that so much. The next piece of modularity here is the encounters. And so you can take a location and pair it with any of the encounters. That's sort of how adventure kits are intended to work. So the encounters, we have different sorts of encounters. They're not just fights. There are combats, but there's also skill challenges, environmental hazards, and role-play encounters as well. And puzzles too. We have puzzles as well. So there's lots of different kinds of encounters. They're not just fights. So we have a deep ones encounter. This was the first encounter that I wrote for the book when initially, I can't even remember what the town was called, but the town wasn't even called Driftchapel at this point, but I knew that I wanted deep ones because they're one of my favorite, like Lovecraftian monster. So this is a fight with deep ones. And there's a roll table here for like what the deep one does if it gets you, if it grapples you. There's like different things that it can try to do, which is kind of fun. And then this is a skill challenge here where you're lighting lamps to try and fight back these like dark monsters called shadowlings. I wanted to do something different here with the skill challenge, where you can actually like roll to see what kind of check you have to make. And so the skill challenge has a lot of variety to it. So, and then we have the Soul Survivor, which is a role play challenge. You're trying to convince this old monster hunter that he needs to help you. Roving Madman is kind of like, it's a combat, but it's also like a chase, like an escape sort of thing where you have to like get away from these townsfolk that are roaming the streets trying to find you. Call of the Idol, which is kind of a puzzle. You have to find this dark idol, which really helps you out later on in the book. We'll talk about that in a little bit. This is a puzzle that you have to solve, but there's also some alternate puzzles here. So there's, again, a lot of variety. You can run this multiple times. Even if you run this for the same group, the puzzle is not necessarily going to be the same. So the other thing is an environmental hazard. This was Tim Carney wrote this encounter, and it is brutal. Yeah, I don't want to give too much away. I don't want to spoil too much, but it's crazy. And then we have the climactic, like the boss fight, which is the Cult of Katu. You're basically stopping this cult from summoning this dark elder god. And And here's the other half of that combat, that landscape battle art that we showed you earlier. Here's some of the, like, what the characters look like in Gloam, what I imagine them to look like, this kind of Victorian colonial sort of aesthetic. This here is a Dawn Hammer. They're like the monster hunters of the world. And then you have this this woman down here is supposed to be like a flintlock tech. She's like an engineer, like fixes guns and stuff. And then there's like this like frontier lumber guy, which I love him. And then dude in the back here is supposed to be like an artist or a mage. And then we get into the non-player characters. These, again, they can fit in any of the locations or the encounters. One thing that we added here in this adventure kit, in Oath of the Frozen King, each NPC had a secret. In this book, each NPC has 3 possible secrets that could all be true at the same time. That was like, when I wrote these secrets, I wanted it to be possible for every secret to be true. Like, I didn't want them to contradict each other. Does that make sense? And so what this does is it adds a bit of a, it adds like an investigative, like intrigue sort of element to the book. The secrets being a central part of the NPCs makes it so that you're not really sure who to trust, and you're not sure who's involved with who and what faction they serve and things like that. And so there's an inherent sense of mystery and secrets to this book. And so, like an example here, Horace Mason, the mayor, it's possible that he has Deep One blood. It's also possible that another NPC, Finch Turner, is his bastard son. And so that's kind of a cool thing. Here's another couple NPCs. Here's Finch Turner. He's a cultist. Portia Brown is my favorite NPC. I love her so much. She's basically a lamplighter, but I like that the idea that she's almost like a Batman of Driftchapel, where she's kind of like hunting the monsters and like is a little too into like hunting monsters and seeking them out and like sort of confronting the Gloam head on. And so I really like her as a character, and I think her design is really cool too. Alexander did a great job with that. I described her as wearing clothes 2 sizes too big, and he just did an amazing job with that. And I love her lamp lighting gear and like the flintlock stuffed into the belt and stuff. So I really like her a lot. Here's Dieter Stone. So he's like a retired monster hunter. He's like an old drunk that walked away from the Dawn Hammers, as they're called here in the world. And this is a little breakout box that tells you a little bit more about the Dawn Hammers and why they're so scattered and leaderless and divided. Love that. Then here's Agnes Wood. She's an artist. She's an alchemist. I love this design. I love the glowy vials. I love the staff that she has. I love the veil. Alexander, my idea with the artists was that they would always wear veils. And I don't know why, but I just like that idea that their faces were always somewhat obscured. And he did an amazing job with this, like, almost like Asian kind of aesthetic to her entire look, especially with the veil and like the things sticking out of her hair. And I love it. And then this little breakout box here gives a little bit more information about the artists and having them like stationed in towns on the frontier. And they're kind of like maesters in Game of Thrones, but a little bit like more like sanctioned and stuff. So then we get into the monsters. So the monsters this time around. So one of the pieces of feedback that we got with Oath of the Frozen King was that the monsters were a little bit bland in the things that they could do in a combat. And so what we did is, in addition to the buffs that monsters get, we gave each monster at least one thing that they could do, and only they could do. So the Katu cultist here has an ability called Bloodlet. As a bonus action, the cultist cuts themselves to draw upon Katu's power. They take 1 slashing damage. The next ability check, saving throw, or attack roll they make before the start of their next turn is made with advantage. So that's kind of a cool, like, thematic, flavorful thing that they can do that gives them like a dynamic action in combat. And I really like how that kind of just slotted in really easily here. The stat blocks here you'll notice, are a lot simpler than typical 5e stat blocks. And we talk about that here in the breakout box. I don't want to go too in depth to it, but it's basically a simplified stat block that we developed for Oath of the Frozen King that really breaks monsters down to their like bare bone necessities, where they don't have skills and abilities. They have just one thing called a roll bonus that is just added to all of their stuff. And then you see here we have scalable damage, which makes them a potential threat to even a high level party. So I really like these like simplified stat blocks in adventure kits. And obviously you can use, whatever stat blocks you want to use, but this is just how we present them in the adventure kits. So some more monsters. We have Mad Townsfolk. This is one of my favorite pieces of art in the book, and it's also one of the first pieces of art that we got from Alex, was this Townsfolk. And I just love the almost like Mike Mignola style, like darkness here that's being carved out by this like blue light coming out of this lantern. I also like, if you notice, the emblem on this cultist's head is the same symbol on the pommel of this Townsfolk's saber. I just love little details like that. Shadowling art, super cool. Love this art. So creepy looking. It's like a squid spider ink monster. Deep one. We went back and forth on the deep ones, man. And eventually we decided that we wanted them to look like anglerfish, because those are the creepiest looking fish. And so we gave them the little, the little anglerfish, little glow bit on their foreheads. And the just crazy teeth of an anglerfish as well. So they turned out really neat looking. I'm really happy with them. I think there's a lot of different ways to depict deep ones, and there's no right way or wrong way, but I'm really happy with like the gaunt, sort of slouched anglerfish look of the deep ones in Driftchapel. So then we have the vestige of Sathog, which is something that you can potentially fight during the environmental hazard encounter that we were talking about earlier. And then here's the Avatar of Katu. This is a big boss. I don't want to linger too much on this page because I don't want to have any spoilers, but this is a really tough monster and has a lot of different cool abilities that it can use. It's a 2-column stat block. So the resolutions and rewards section is like a way to like wrap it up. Like how do you end the adventure? What sorts of, if they completed their quest, what sorts of like what happens and what kinds of like treasure or social rewards would they get. So the treasure there are things like magical items, but there's also the social rewards, which is like, how does the town react to this? Like what happens? Do you, are you indebted to the people? Do you get some sort of like favors, things like that? So, all right, now we get into, this is my favorite part of every adventure kit, the toolbox. And the toolbox it's a way for you to generate encounters, monsters, traps, skill challenges, non-player characters, like locations. It's just like any hole that you need to fill, any gap in your adventure, you can turn to the toolbox and really quickly and easily roll up something. This toolbox has some different things in it than Oath of the Frozen King. For instance, we have madness. Obviously, this being like a Lovecraftian horror kind of Cthulhu-esque adventure, we wanted an emphasis on madness. And so these are things that there are various monsters and encounters and effects throughout the book that point you towards this table. Like, if you fail your saving throw, roll on the madness effects table. And this is what we call an escalating table. And the escalating table is basically you can roll a D10 or a D20. The D10 are, the 1 through 10 are kind of minor things, and then 11 through 20 are more major things. And so if you roll a D20, there's obviously a much higher chance that you're going to, get something a little bit more intense. We also have an optional sanity and madness system, which is based on usage dice, similar to the Black Hack. You basically have a scaling die that can go up or down depending on what's going on. And you have things, irreparable insanity, that can happen as well, which is really nasty stuff. Can like permanently affect your stats and your abilities. We have Gloam effects, which is like just weird stuff that can happen. Like you just roll on this. Like this is true of any of the like adventure oddities stuff. Anytime there's a lull in the adventure, anytime you just need a little spark of inspiration, you roll on these tables. So the Gloam effects is just like weird psychological sort of horror things that can happen. My favorite is number 8 here. A toy from your childhood rolls toward you from out of the darkness. It appears exactly as you remember it, save for a set of bloody fingerprints. I think that's just awesome. Thematic phrases, again, just you need a little spark of inspiration. You roll on that. This was something that we added to the toolbox, the rumors and the story hooks. These are, as far as I'm concerned, essential to any sort of city or urban adventure. You want to be able to hear rumors. You want to be able to gather information. you want to be able to like talk to an NPC and find out something weird and unnerving. And a good example here is the constellations in the night sky have begun shifting and even disappearing. Or Baroness Yesenia Foxglove secretly relocated her only living heir away to Driftchapel recently, along with a small contingent of armed guards. Not only is that a rumor, that's a potential like adventure there. That's a mission. You know what I mean? That's something that you can roll on and instantly get another session out of this book. The story hooks are similar. And Ortis claims to have the ability to calm the storms plaguing Driftchapel, if only they had the proper ritual ingredients from Erwile Bog. A Crown's Guard deserter seeks asylum after refusing to march into the Gaslands. Those are adventures. Those are sessions. These are little nuggets of story here that you can roll and instantly have something for the players to do. Yeah, really, really happy with that. The encounter generator has completely been redone from Oath of the Frozen King. We've consolidated it. We've made it easier to use, less unwieldy, and we've added encounter objectives, which add like a dynamic sort of goal to each encounter. So, for instance, you roll the die, you get a 5. Okay, the encounter is a rescue. Reach and retrieve an important object or NPC within 1d6 rounds. So that adds a little something. It's not just, okay, here's some monsters, fight them. It's like, okay, here's some monsters, you got to fight them. Also, you need to reach and retrieve an important object or an NPC within 1d6 rounds. We've also included terrain, which adds, some cool kind of like features that you can utilize in the descriptions, players can utilize. And then encounter escalation, which is like a twist that happens in the battle that will, kind of shake things up a little bit. So really happy with how the encounter generator turned out. I feel like it's like nicely finessed. Items and loot. This is like just like random loot, random trinkets that you can find. I love all this stuff. What's a good one? Oh man, there's a chunk of driftwood carved into the likeness of a pipe smoking fisherman. That's a Barker item right there. That's totally a Barker item. Location generator. This is an easy way to generate locations as well as sights, sounds, and sensations for those locations. To fill in the gaps between the major locations that are provided in the locations chapter. Monster generator. This is much like the monster generator in Oath of the Frozen King, obviously flavored to be more in line with Gloam. This is one of my favorite pieces of art in the book right here. So this is what we call an ogre. This is power armor. This is like Blaugus powered construct. This is one of the major things that I wanted in the setting when I was initially devising it, was I wanted power armor. And because who doesn't love power armor? And Alexander Kosik just did an amazing job with like this. It looks like a Big Daddy from BioShock with like a conquistador helmet. And like, I just love it so much. It turned out so cool. And it's using an anchor as a weapon. Like, come on, man. Anyway, that's one of the monsters that is provided here in the roll table, is a battle-forged ogre. So, yeah, that's really cool. Quick monster stats. You can really easily generate just like a cool monster. Like here, let's do one really quick here. Well, actually, I don't have dice next to me, do I? No, I don't have my dice next to me. But you could, roll up. Okay, it's a beast. All right, it's a desperate wild creature with matted fur. So it's a beast, and roll a d10. Oh, it's 5. It's unless it's coerced. So it's a beast that's been coerced into fighting. And it's a skirmisher, and it has, let's give it a buff. You roll a 7. It has regeneration. So it's a beast that regenerates, but it's been coerced into fighting. Okay, there you go. That's cool. Skill challenge generator. It's a really easy way to generate some cool, like fun skill challenges. You have to make skill checks in order to succeed at this challenge. Trap generator. This is really fun. This is similar to how it was in Oath, obviously Gloam themed, flavored. I love this art. It's one of the like gross horror pieces of art that Alex did. I love it. Like this ink Gloam is just like going down this guy's throat. I love it so much. NPC generator, very similar to how it was in Oath. The names are, I love the names. They're all like colonial. Gabriel Brooke, Rosanna Davis, Elijah Brown, Solomon Kane. Huh, what? And then NPC personality and appearance, as well as you can roll up gear, which is all like Gloam themed. There's like rifles and sabers and hatchets and stuff. And then strengths and drawbacks and possible secrets. This art right here is one of my favorite pieces of art in the book. I love it so much. It's like, looks like it'd be on the movie poster for the Gloam movie. This was another stretch goal. This was something that Tim and I kind of tag teamed, but Parker had a pretty heavy hand in this too. But this is a short story that explains how Dieter, one of the NPCs, made his way to Driftchapel and why he is the way he is. Had a lot of fun writing this. And really cool piece of art here. This is one of my favorite pieces of art in the book. Now, here we are at the Gloam Gazetteer. This is the big stretch goal. This is the thing that we got at the end of the Kickstarter. And it's like a little mini campaign book in the back of an adventure kit. I just want to take a moment to this piece of art. Is so good. So this ink bottle's falling over. It's spilling ink across what looks like a map of the world of Gloam, and it's creating Katu's eye, and these inky tentacles are coming in and surrounding Driftchapel. I love it so much. Oh. I keep saying this is my favorite piece of art in the book, but literally this is my favorite piece of art in the book. Here's the world map of Gloam. Again, we wanted to have that be in this section for very easy reference, and also it's so good that we put it in the book twice. Okay, so each page of the Gloam Gazetteer has a different region, and each region has different locations within it. Each location has a plot, like adventure hook, and then there's also a little sidebar, like breakout box, talking about who's in charge of this region. Alexander did a little like landscape art for each region, and they all turned out so fantastic. So this is the city of Oubliette, which is built upon these like dwarven ruins at the top of these mountains. You can see there are dirigibles like tethered to this city, this massive kind of Victorian gaslight city at the top of these mountains. This is like the last beacon of hope for humanity. Barony of Strand. This is where Driftchapel is. So this is the bulk of the adventure takes place in the Barony of Strand. Eggfield Isles. It's really cool art. I love the inky blackness kind of destroying this bridge. Oh, I love this art so much. Oh God. Like these things are so creepy looking. And I always describe, we've always described the Gloam looking like it's seeping upwards, like it's dripping up towards the sky. And it's so perfect here. My favorite thing about this is all of these creatures look like men, except for what the hell is this? This like bird thing back here. It's so good. County of Thurland. You'll notice each regent is explained here. Duchy of Record, which is like this is like mining, iron, mountainous region. Margrave of Hildebrandt. This is like where all the woods and forests are. The Gaslands. This is the Mordor of Gloam. You don't want to go in the Gaslands. And then we also have a generator here for generating your own settlements and adventuring locations in Gloam. Settlement name generator. You can roll up your own name for your settlement. And then here's that wonderful piece of art again, unobscured by anything. Love that so much. And then here are all of the wonderful people that helped make this book possible. These are all the Kickstarter backers who like donated money to help make this book happen. So that's Shadows Over Driftchapel. This is the new adventure kit from Absolute Tabletop. I'm incredibly happy with this book. I'm really proud of it. I feel like it is a natural progression of the adventure kit line and the way that we do things at Absolute Tabletop. I want to thank my Absolute Tabletop cohorts, Tim Carney, Michael Barker, and James Carney, for making this book with me, for writing it, for editing it, for polishing it, for coming up with amazing ideas for the town of Driftchapel and the world of Gloam. I love this book so much, and it's a book that I hope doesn't spend very much time on people's shelves. I hope that you use this book a lot at your table to run adventures of all kinds. If you're interested in this book at all, there are links down in the description for PDF copies as well as physical copies of this adventure kit. So thanks for stopping by, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this scroll through of Adventure Kit Shadows Over Driftchapel. I love this book so much. I'm really happy with it. So keep an eye out for more. I'm definitely going to be talking about this book a lot and maybe even running some games using it. So thank you, everyone, for stopping by. And the feedback on this book has been phenomenal. There's been a lot of kind words said about this book, and I'm really happy that people dig it. And it's really important to me and to the rest of Absolute Tabletop that every book is better than the last. And I feel like we've done that. So yeah, thank you guys. Take care. Happy gaming all.